Morning, church. Good to be here, eh? Man, for me, I've had about, 3 weeks of holiday, and then last week came and sat and sort of getting into the zone. So this is my first week kind of really back. And I don't know about you, but it was good to have I hope you've had a good holiday and a rest. And, 2023 we're already into February. So it's crazy. It's a brand new year. So I don't know how you're feeling about it, but I thought actually what I really had a heart to do is actually just to pray this morning, just as a new year, like just a washing off of the old, right? Maybe of the disappointments of last year, the frustrations of last year, maybe some of the conversations of last year that have discouraged. I know, actually, Brendan was just praying this morning, and even I remember, like if you're running ministries and things, and it's like, oh man, I hope this year is going to be different to last year, and actually, so I just want to pray just a washing off of all that stuff off us. So if you just want to join with me, and we just want to pray. Father, I thank you for 2023. And Lord, I just pray over this church, Lord, over the ones here and over ones who haven't, maybe are listening online or aren't able to make it this morning. They're on holiday in the long weekend. Father, I just pray right now for just a washing off of everything that's not you. Lord, that it would just be like jumping in the shower, and I would just pray for just a spiritual clean, Lord, of just every word, that's been spoken, Lord, that has caused discouragement or despondency or frustration. Lord, just everything that's happened over the last few years, I just pray for a washing off of those things. And Lord, I pray for just a fresh just touch of your joy and your peace, Lord, and just for the excitement for what's to come, Lord, in 2023. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Yeah. So 2023. So we thought, if you haven't been here, we've been working our way through the book of Mark, and we left at the end of Mark, at the end of chapter 13, and so the last 3 chapters to go, 14, 15, and 16, and so a third of Mark's book is the last week of Jesus' life, and we're down to probably the Wednesday, somewhere around there, and the day before Passover, which was Thursday, and then the Sabbath was or Thursday, Friday, then and then it was into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We're going to talk about that too, and that was the timeline of what was happening, and so these are the last probably 48 hours or so of Jesus' life. And Mark has this is really the narrative. It's called the Passion narrative, which is the Latin word for suffering. And so it's the passage of suffering. This is the journey of suffering for Jesus, and sort of chronologically, Mark chronicles the sort of the metastasizing resentment and hurt and pride and fear of the religious authorities, and how that kind of boils over and grows, and it goes into the crowd and into the Roman authorities. The disciples abandon and leaving, and so starting from Judas and then going right through, obviously, to Peter. And so at the end, we find that Jesus is completely abandoned by all, and even as Heavenly Father, His presence has also lifted. And so this morning, actually, we start that descent in terms of what happened to Jesus in these final 48 hours. So Mark 14, 1 to 11, we're going to read that. It says, "Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table, in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard, and she broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you can help them any time you want, but you will not always have me." And she did what she could, and she poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised him to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. It's quite a little sort of, section, and well, it speaks of humanity, and it's this, again, it's this Markian sandwich. If you remember the frame of the format of ABA, and so there's this story in the middle, and it's sandwiched by a story on the outside, and you can see this contrast, right, between this extravagant sacrificial act of faith, right, and then on the other hand, this decision of another to actually sacrifice his faith in an act of betrayal. It's like two polar opposite situations going on. You've got, and what is just crazy about it is what Mark does is he emphasizes it, and he doesn't even tell us who the woman is. That this unknown woman, right, takes this incredibly expensive perfume, breaks it over Jesus in this, this act of extravagant worship. Meanwhile, Judas, one of his 12, one of his disciples, has been with Jesus the whole time. Decides to betray him. He doesn't just decide to walk away. He decides to betray him, to get him killed. Like, it's incredible. Like, what the heck is going on? And it's this. It's like he creates a sandwich, and he wants us to eat it this morning and to think about it. Like how can someone who was called by Jesus, who's walked with him the last 3 years, heard his teaching. He was in the boat when he thought he was going to die and saw Jesus stand up and say, "Come, peace, be quiet." He collected up the breadcrumbs, that fed 5,000 people, 2 loaves, of 5 loaves and 2 fish. He saw all this incredible stuff, and then just in a moment, just goes, "No, stuff it. Going to pot you." And on the other hand, we had this complete stranger, this woman, who just comes into this scene and offers this incredible, this act of faith, this act of discipleship. And I guess again it begs this question that Mark sort of pops up every now and again, all the way through, which is this: so who's on the inside and who's on the outside? Who are Jesus' true followers? Who are his true disciples? Who are the ones walking in faith? And we would have gone, Judas would have, we would have thought, surely he's the one. He's on the inside. And Mark reverses this. And I guess so the question for us is, and for me when I was reading this was, well, how you doing, Ian? How's your faith? Is there some disappointments in your festering in your heart? Yeah. It's funny how often when you walk, and the longer you go on your Christian walk, can be a temptation, right, to become cynical and bitter, because things that you thought were going to happen didn't happen. I thought, God, that job was for me, but I didn't get it. Maybe tragedy, maybe sickness, maybe your kids didn't do what you thought they would do. Maybe friends at school, there's something happened, and you think, God, where are you? And there's this temptation often that things can get in our hearts, and they can begin to rot. And interestingly, like if you look at, if you read Mark and you read the other Gospels, it's not no one actually says why Judas did it. We don't know. We don't know what happened that caused them to flip. We don't know if it was that. I mean, some theories were like, he was a zealot and he thought that he wanted Jesus to take over, liberate the government and the land and all that sort of thing, and it became clear that he wasn't going to do that, so I'm out of here, stuff you. But there's nothing really in Scripture that shows that. We know that he was a thief. He was involved with the treasury. Maybe he got offended about this outrageous act of worship this lady did, and he was offended. He thought that money should have been used, to help the poor. Should have been used practically. But we actually don't know. But something happened in his heart. And I guess actually the leaving it unanswered sort of, I think it's, it calls us to think about, well, where are we at? Where is our walk at? Are we whole before the Lord? Is there something that we need to lay down? As like Greg was sharing this morning, and that came through with the word. And so, actually Jeremiah 17:9, it says that the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? And often I don't think Judas, he probably didn't even know it was in there. And we don't know what's in our own hearts until sometimes it pops up, doesn't it? And so there's that warning that, hey, to be on your guard, to protect your heart, and to keep it soft before the Lord. And so Mark starts this in verse 1 and 2 there, that the Passover is the day, a day away, and the festival of unleavened bread was a couple of days. And he was reminding us that the Passover was looming, and they celebrated this in Jerusalem. And apparently, different people have different numbers, but they reckon that, and of course, you went to Jerusalem to celebrate it, to Passover. And so there was anywhere between 60 and 120,000 people that arrived. And they reckon that, between 85 and 300,000 pilgrims. And they reckon that population was anywhere between 60 and 100,000. So you're talking like 3 times the population. So it just would have been inundated. People were camping in all the towns round about. They would have been, staying with family and friends. Like the place would have been electric. It would have been pumping. It would be like like an AMP show on steroids. Like it was just everybody came, and so the hustle and bustle. This was the same event when Jesus was lost by his parents for 3 days. When he was a kid, when they arrived. So can you imagine, like, to lose your child for 3 days? Like, heck, that sort of, it kind of gives you an impression of what it must have been like. I reckon 200,000 plus animals, lambs, were killed over Passover. So it was a celebration and a remembrance of God's act of freeing the Jewish people from slavery. And so it was their heritage, right? But it was also their inheritance as well. So they lived in the land, but they were also obviously free, and they saw what God did in freeing them from Egypt from a miraculous act. Where the angel of death came around over Egypt and killed the firstborn if there was no blood over the lintels. And so in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that spoke of it reminded them of the urgency. You see, when they had to, at the first, if you remember the first event, in Egypt, they were told to clothe themselves, to wrap up all their gear, to have everything packed. And so the bread has no use because there was no time to let it to rise. So it was a festival that reminded them of the travel, of the Exodus, of God's providence, of walking through the Red Sea. And so you can imagine it, they're looking to that, and then the people are like, my gosh, but our land is still under foreign occupation. And many people believe that this God's sovereign act at Passover was a foreshadowing of what he was going to do, that he was going to come and return and liberate them, and that it was going to happen on Passover. So you can imagine the anticipation of the people. Josephus, he was the historian at the time, and he spoke of year after year, there was riots, and there was, because people were, if there was one day where they were going to get wound up at the Roman occupation, man, it was Passover, right? Because it was a reminder of everything and a promise of what was to come. And so it was so on the edge that the Roman governor used to live in, who would normally have his residence in Caesarea on the edge of the Mediterranean, he would actually move into Jerusalem and stay there the week so that he could have his finger on the pulse, so that if there was any uprising, if there was anything going on, he could get on top of it and squelch it. So hence why the Jewish authorities they're like, well, we want to take him out, but man, we don't want to upset the people. We don't want to cause a riot. We've got to do this quietly. And they were scheming, they were plotting the demise of Jesus. And so that was the boil, the atmosphere that was going on at that time. And so in comes Jesus into the Passover. And so in this first sentence, Mark links death and with Jesus, the Passover and the plotting of the religious authorities. So he's right from the get-go, he is intertwining those themes. So whatever their intentions were, they completely stuffed it up, didn't they? Because actually it was a really public crucifixion. The crowds were involved. There were almost riots. The religious leaders, the Roman authorities, everyone in the end was involved. And Jesus ended up being crucified on Passover, on the day. He became the lamb. And at the time, they would have been thinking back to the Passover lamb that sheltered them from the angel of death, that freed them from that freed them from slavery from Egypt. And of course, Jesus, now for us, when we look back, we see him as the sacrificial lamb who freed us from the sin and death and from the spiritual powers and authorities. And so there was the interconnecting of these prophetic words and the fulfillment of them. And then the story changes. We jump to Jesus staying at the house of Simon the leper. And actually, that wouldn't have been a popular place to stay. Who wants to stay at Simon the leper, He probably was healed. He was cleansed, but he still had the stigma. He was Simon the leper. But hey, here's Jesus hanging there, And this woman, unnamed woman, interrupts the fellowship of his disciples, of the guy all eating there. And Jewish etiquette's that, a woman can't interrupt unless she's serving food. That's about the only kind of scenario. And yet she does this and she breaks protocol. And she comes and she offers this this act of worship, this extravagant sort of, it was this pure nard. And it was made from tree roots, and it came all the way from India. So can you imagine, that's incredible, from that distance and that time frame, and that time. So it came over and it was brought. We don't know if it was an heirloom, but we don't know whether it was part of her family passed down. But it was worth 300 denarii, which was considered a year's wages. So to put that in perspective, if you remember Peter, when he was exasperated at Jesus, when the crowds were hungry, and Jesus was like, well, you go feed them. Peter's like, bro, it would take 200 denarii to feed 5,000 people. What the heck? And so this money was nearly a third more than the quantity it would take to feed 5,000 people, plus the woman and kids. So it was an extravagant gift. And it's interesting, she didn't just simply open the jar, but she broke it. There was no coming back. She crushed this jar and allowed the oil and the perfume to and put it over Jesus' head. And I was thinking about that, just this incredible act of worship, that there was no going back, that despite culture and etiquette and everything, she did this out of an act of worship. And it just so, contrasts with what was going on in Judas's heart. And I was thinking about that and thinking about, man, God, how the laying down of things and to give it all. And during the camp, JH camp that myself and Daniel were on a couple of weeks ago now, I had the opportunity, it's like a father and son or parent and child camps. And I got to meet a chap, and his name was Tamari, and he is from Tauranga. And turned out that he was a pastor there at C3, and we got really chatting to him in Israel. And I think, Daniel, you got a picture of him there. Can you show? Yep, so that's Tamari there and that's his wife, Tessa, I believe. And I didn't meet her, but I met Tamari and their son. And anyway, so he had some great God stories, and I asked him permission. I said, can I share these? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so the first one was that he started working with youth when he was sort of 17, 18, and he just started running a sort of a mini youth group, and it grew and grew, and it got to, I think, 60, 70 kids, and they were making too much noise in the hall that they were in, and they got kicked out. And so he had these kids, they were like, well, we need a place to stay. And so he got these kids, they came round and they started praying at 5 o'clock in the morning prior to going to school. And so they just prayed for, God, we need somewhere to run this youth group, and to hang out. And so Tamari thought, I'll head over to his mum's place. And his mum was, she's a real hard shot, and apparently her house is always open, and there's just random strangers and homeless people who just come there and just be there and then drift off. And so Tamari bowls up one morning, and he got there and he's saying hi to Mum, and there's this guy in the corner, and he's just, there's another homeless guy, and he's got his ripped shorts and just a pair of jandals and an old T-shirt, and he's just, scruffy beard, and he thinks, man, I don't recognise you, So he goes up and he goes, g'day, I'm Tamari, and the guy sort of looks at him and goes, well, God just told me to help Tamari today. And he's like, okay, that's a bit weird, never seen him before in his life. He looks over to his mum, and she's like, gives him a nod, it's okay, and he's like, and so the guy's like, so what do you need then? And Tamari's like, Mum, is the guy got has he got a mental illness or something, or am I? And he thinks, okay, I need a building, And the guy just goes, deadpan, okay, tell you what, you go find it, and I'll buy it for you. And takes a look at his mum again, and she's like, well, go for it, if that's what he's saying. And so rings up a real estate agent, goes around 3 or 4 buildings, finds an old warehouse and comes back to this guy and he says, I found something, it's $600,000. And he's like, that's fine, just buys it. And they start using this hall. And never met the guy. And hadn't seen him a lot. And then after that, that was it. Turns out that he was a property developer. Had no idea. And Tamani was, Tama, that's what we're for short. So Tama is, fast forward, doesn't see this guy for a couple of years, and his group grows. And he's got about 150 odd kids coming to his group now. And he's pops over to see his mum just one week, and there's the guy again sitting in his deck chair, And he's like, oh, g'day, Tama. He's like, oh, g'day. He says, how's the youth group going? He goes, yeah, it's going really good. And before he was could say anything, he goes, oh, I bet you've outgrown that building, haven't you? And he was like, oh, yeah, I have really. Oh, well, go buy another one. I'll pay for it. And he's like, wow, okay. So he goes out again, gets a real estate agent, heads around and looks, and he finds another building. And he comes back to him and he goes, it's 1.6 million. And the guy's like, whew, okay, I was thinking maybe 1.2, and Tama's like, mate, it's fine, Well, like, I'm not going to quibble over 1.2 million. And he's like, well, I saw a couple of others, and when I found that one for 1.6, and he's like, okay, will you show me? And they go around and they look at these ones, and yeah, this one here could be suitable. I could see you working in that, And then he says to Tama, he says, hey, you know what? Show me this one for 1.6. Show me what it's going to have a look at it. And Tama's like, no, honestly, I'm happy with the 1.2. And this building here. And he's like, no, seriously, let's just go and have a look. And he goes in and they look around and he goes, man, this is the one, isn't it? This is it. And so he bought it for 1.6 million. Wow. So it's just this giving all that you can. He just laid it down. Like, it's incredible. What a legacy. Apparently the guy, he's one of these really quirky, eccentric chaps. He's probably like in his 70s or 80s now, and he's saying, I haven't seen him for 10 years, and he's just disappeared off the radar again, And anyway, so to carry on there, I wanted to ask you, kind of, what's the Lord asking you to give? What does it look like for you? What is the extravagant worship that it's just that He's asking for you? So Tama, I wanted to share a little bit. So what happened when he was a kid? He was a great soccer player, a great football player. And he was right up there. He was training with Winton Ruther. And he was spotted. He got asked to go on an invitation side to play against the All Whites. He was a striker, and he scored 3 goals against them as a teenager against the national side. And he was super excited about, he was really up there and could play in the English leagues. That was his dream. And unfortunately, though, he had a number of head knocks. And back in the day when he was playing, there was no, recovery time and all that sort of thing. And so over a season, the last season he played, he had got knocked out 11 times and went to the doctors. And it started actually with a kid he was versing against, and he did a slide tackle. And someone on the other team ran up to him and just kicked him in the head. And just kept running. And he has no record, just knocked them clean out. He just absolutely has no recollection of the whole event. And this person was suspended for life for what he did. But that started it. And so anyway, so at the age of 17, I think it was around that sort of age, he was told, like, you cannot play anymore, it's going to kill you. And so this dream just died. And he went in some, just real depression. He just spent a whole year just wanting to take his life, just thinking about, well, there's no hope, no future. What's the point? It's all been taken from me. And he had one of those top psychiatrists in there assigned to him. He was living in Hamilton at the time. And They were trying to, meeting him weekly, trying to help him. And it got to the point where she was like, you know what, somebody, just watch some TV. Just get your mind off this. And actually, he felt like, really? Like, that's the world's best answer? Is that just watch some TV to get your mind off wanting to take your life? And it was just filled him with total hopelessness. And that night, or one of the night, he just at home in his bedroom, Rinton Ruther had a faith, and he'd seen a bit of Christianese. He didn't really know a whole lot, but so he just said, God, if you're real, if you're like, I just need you, and I'll give you my life if you're out there. And just at that moment, he just had this incredible encounter with God. Peace and joy just like flooded into his heart, and it was like, he just said it was like the blinds came off, and he had this just this total transformation in his heart. And he literally ran to the psychiatrist the next day, and he's like, walks in, just opens the door, and he's like, I'm done, I'm sorted, I'm healed, I found Jesus, I'm just, I found joy, I found love, I don't need you anymore, and she's like, man, what's changed, like what the heck shifted, and so he told her what happened, and he said, well, that's great, Tama, you don't need my help anymore, and that was the last appointment he had. And so he's like, woohoo, and he heads out and he thinks, well, I'll get back into playing football. And he goes out, starts playing football. First day, gets a grade 3 roll of his ankle, rolls it, and it swells up. It's normally a 6-week recovery. And he's like, oh, so he limps into church on crutches, and a lady comes up to him and says, can I pray for you? And he's like, absolutely. So he puts his foot out, she prays, it's instantly healed. And swelling, the whole lot just returns down. And he's like, awesome, man, me and God, we can conquer the world, we're going to Liverpool. Goes back to training the next day, and back into it. Following week, plays a second game. And he rolls his ankle, his opposite ankle. This is a true story. Same thing, grade 3, 6 weeks recovery. It's in, bandages on crutches. And he's right, I'm off to church. Where's that woman? And he goes, finds her, pray for the other one, And so she prays, and it's like, bang, instantly healed again. And he's like, see, I knew it. God and me we're like this. We can conquer the world. We're going to Liverpool, So he's out there again. 2 weeks later, he's playing a game of football. Ball gets kicked over, over his head, and he's sprinting for to catch up to it. And goalie's coming charging out. And obviously he's a guy, man, he just lived on the edge. And anyway, so he just ran as hard as he could to kick this ball. And as he kicked, the goalie had landed on the ball and rolled. And so his foot and his leg, his ankle here, just hit the guy's hip bone. And it completely shattered it. He had the bone came out of his leg, and it was on the... It was touching the shin pad apparently, and it was a spiral break, the worst kind you can have possibly. The paramedics came to him and were like, bro, we can't move you. We're going to have to pull this out and straighten it before we take you to hospital. And so they grabbed hold of the end and they pull the leg back and straighten it up. And he just, completely blacked out from the pain. And then, anyway, he gets into the hospital, right, and he's sitting there, they scan his leg, and it's just, it's in bits. And he's like, you know what? I believe in Jesus, and I believe he heals. I want you to rescan it. And they're like, no, bro, it costs hundreds to use these machines. This is what it is. No, honestly, I've prayed. I believe God's going to heal it. And I just want, had this big argument with them. Finally, they go, okay, we'll scan it. And they rescanned his leg. And it was still broken. And he's like, no, I'm going to, and he asked them to rescan it again. And he was like adamant. It's like, no, man, I know God he's real. He loves us. He heals. Scan it. And they're like, no way, man. And he's had this argument with them, and they rescan it, And he was like, and he sat there and he looked at me and he goes, Ian, you know what? It was still broken. And 10 months later, he go through rehabilitation and everything else. He was finally starting to walk again. But he said actually there was a miracle in it, because at the time, when they pulled it straight, all the bone fragments actually came back into place perfectly. He didn't need bolts or pins or anything. So he's truly thankful. And midway through that recovery, he felt the Lord say to him one night, said, "Tama, do you believe in healing? Or do you still believe in healing?" And he was like, "Yeah, I do, Lord." And all he got back was, "Good." And so fast forward, he's on that stage, prepping the stage in his new building, and you wouldn't believe it, but he slipped off the stage and broke his ankle. And he knew it wasn't a sprain because he's obviously broken plenty of ankles before. And so his friend takes him into the hospital, right? And now I can't remember if it was his friend or the hospital technician, one of the two he was witnessing to. And he's sitting there in this, getting the scan, and he feels the Lord say to him, "Ask him to rescan it." And he's like, "Oh no, Lord, I've been here before." Like, it's the indignity and the shame of no, and he's just like, Tama, I want you to ask them to rescan it. And he's like, "Oh." And he's like, "Okay." He's like, "Guys, do you know what? I really believe in healing. And I really believe, I've prayed, and I really believe God's healed my ankle. Can you rescan this?" And they're like, "No way." And he's like, "No, please, begging you, I really believe it. Like, it's save your time, just rescan it." And so they do. And it's completely healed. Yeah. And the lady's like, she's like, "No, what? I've got the before one right there." Right, so they're looking at the two. And his friend or the technician, whichever one, it just was like, "Wow, God's real. That's it. I'm done." And she came to faith because looking at the scans, they brought the other technician, like, "Check this out. Like, this is incredible, And so he got to witness to them and everything. See, for Tama, the Lord was asking, would you lay down your dignity? It wasn't money. It was his dignity. Would you trust me again? Would you give me your all? He gave him the Lord's dignity and asked for that rescan. And because of that, someone came to faith in that room. It's incredible. It's just an act of worship, an act of laying down something in your heart. And through that, God honoured it. He saw an awesome healing, as well as not having to have crutches and go through it all again. And in the same way, Jesus responds. It's interesting that when you do stuff like that and you step out, you always get your detractors, don't you? You always get people who criticize and who will put it down or have a go. And that's what happened to this woman, this unnamed woman, when she broke that alabaster jar in an act of worship. Everyone scoffed. And they thought, man, it should have been used for the poor. It should be this, that, and the other. They thought this is outrageous. And yet, it's really interesting that they say, "Oh, we should have been used it for the poor, for a practical thing." And so at the time, it was considered very meritorious to do things for the poor, right? But it was considered even a higher of more merit was to do something for the dead, to embalm, to bury, to look after and to honour the dead. And because, I guess it's like with the living, you can choose when, right? But in that culture, in that time, if someone dies, you've got to sort it out right there and then. You've got to drop everything off. There's no refrigerators, no morgues. Like, you got 40 degrees, things start smelling pretty quick. So it was considered more meritorious to do things for the dead than the living because of that, because of the kind of like the inconvenience factor. And so it's really interesting that these disciples who had a go at this lady, they didn't bury Jesus. Like, when push came to shove, they went there. And actually, it was a random stranger, like an undercover guy, Joseph of Arimathea, who took Jesus' body, who embalmed and who put him in a borrowed tomb and buried him. And that was not in Jewish culture required. Jesus died as a traitor. He had a traitor's death, and that was not required of someone who was guilty. And so Jesus' response is the same. He says, leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing. And in verse 8, he says, she did what she could. And actually, it's the same phrase, it's the same word that was used for the lady who went, who dropped the 2 copper coins in the treasury. And that Jesus, his response to that woman was, man, look at her. What she gave her all. And so it wasn't about a monetary value. It's always about your heart. It's always about where you're at and giving what we can and all we have to give to the Lord, whether it's our dignity or something else. So I want to encourage you this morning, just as we finish up, the music team come. Like, where's your heart this morning? What is in 2023 the thing the Lord's just asking you to lay down, to give him your all? And I know for me, actually, it's my time. I feel like something else in a talk that they did at JH, one of the talks, they had this real small sentence, and they said, you either live with the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. And I thought, man, that hit me. And I thought, I've got too many regrets from last year and the last few years. Times where I should have spoken out, or I should have done this, but at the time I was probably too discouraged, or I was too frustrated, or I was too tired, or I was too preoccupied with other things that probably shouldn't have really mattered. But I didn't, because I didn't have God's presence with me. I wasn't resting in his joy and in his peace and allowing him to direct me during the day. And I hadn't given God that priority, that time to abide with him. And so I live with the pain of discipline.
That hit me.
To carve out that time. Or
I've got too many regrets from last year and the last few years.
And I thought, wow, Lord,
times where I should have spoken out, or I should have done this. But at the time, I was probably too discouraged.
Moments of regret.
Or I was too frustrated. Or I was too tired. Or I was too preoccupied with other things that probably shouldn't have really mattered.
Close to the Lord.
But I didn't.
And so I don't
because
know for you what
I didn't
it looks like.
have
I encourage
God's
you
presence
this morning,
with me.
if
I
you would
wasn't
like to
resting
come
in his
forward
joy
and
and in
go,
his
God, you know
peace
what?
and
and
allowing him to direct
actually,
me
Lord,
during
I
the
want to
day.
give you this area
And
of my heart.
I
want to say
I
that
hadn't
this
given
is gonna
God that
change
priority,
this
that time
I want to give
to
you
abide with
what
him.
all that I can give you, not just
And
a
so
part,
I
not just
so
a
I either
little, but
I live with
and I was
the pain of
man,
discipline. that hit me.
So I just carve
And
out
I
that
thought,
time.
yeah,
We finish on a song.
Or I've got too many regrets from
Father,
last
I
year
thank
and
you.
the last
And
few
I thought,
years.
wow, Lord,
Times where
this is not
I
just
should have spoken out, or I should have done this. But at the time, I was probably too discouraged,
what was going on with Judas.
or I was too frustrated, or I was too tired, or I was too preoccupied with other things that probably
Lord, of
shouldn't have
abiding
really
close
mattered.
to the Lord, where
But I
we would.
didn't.
So I don't know
Because
for you
I
what it
didn't
looks like.
have
Father, where we wouldn't
God's
encourage
presence with me. I wasn't resting in his joy and his peace and allowing him to direct me
the
to my
areas
day.
that you are touching.
And I
want to say
I
that
hadn't
this
given
gives
God that priority, that time to abide with him.
all that I can give you are.
And so I either I live with
and I was
the
pain of
that
discipline.
hit me.
To carve
And I
out that
thought,
time.
I've got too many regrets from
Father,
last
I
year
thank
and
you.
the last
And I
few years.
thought, Father,
Times
if you'd like
where
to
I
sit down,
should have spoken out, or I should have done this.
sandwich that
But at the time, I was probably
revelation
too discouraged,
about
or
going for
I
testimony
was
and
too frustrated, or I was too tired,
while
or
you've
I was
had
too preoccupied with other things that
you've
probably
had
shouldn't have
injuries
really
like your
mattered.
legs,
But I didn't. So I don't know where you, but I didn't have God's presence with me. I wasn't resting in his joy to me His peace and allowing Him to direct me with His and I want to say I hadn't given God that priority, that time to abide with Him. And so I either I live and I was praying in the morning, and I thought, yeah,